Welcome everyone to our latest episode of Better Humans at Work. I am thrilled to be joined with Kaivona Parker, the head of sales and enablement training and onboarding of Kaivona Parker Agency, or KPA. Kaivona is dedicated to elevating business through specialized services in sales, business development, training, and growth. With over 12 years of proven success in the sales industry, she caters to diverse clientele ranging from founders and CEOs, aiming to cultivate world-class sales teams to recent graduates aspiring to excel in sales professions. Her mission is to instill confidence and competence in sales professionals, enabling them to deliver with a great attitude and professional demeanor. Kaivona is dedicated to fostering individual and sustainable improvement, underpinned by a challenger mindset, direct feedback, and a positive, contagious smile. She's committed to transforming sales experiences and creating a lasting positive impact on both her clients and their stakeholders. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Doc. I'm excited.
I was especially excited for this conversation because you come from a sales background, not a DEI background, even though you do some DEI work. So can you explain a little bit about your background? And just so you know, most of our audience members here are like HR and DEI professionals.
Got it. Yeah, no, it's very intertwined, right? The work is intertwined. I've been in sales for 15 years now, and the work that we do with HR, with like recruiting and hiring, and that directly impacts sales, right? So I work in developing onboarding plans and enablement structure. So typically reps first 30, 60, 90 days, and then recursive training on top of that. I'll be responsible for mapping out their time in their seat. And that involves trainings. That involves also really being able to map or tie together the keys that the hiring manager found, that the recruiter found, and saying, okay, what have we found in the interview process that might show up in the onboarding process, and how do we use those tools or those tips or those notes to retain them and then help train them and ramp them so that they enjoy being in seat and that they become profitable for themselves and for the company long term. So I love bringing the sales aspect to the conversation, because a lot of the times the HR role is hiring for those sales roles, but we don't get to have that conversation.
Yeah, and coming in with such a strong sales lens. I mean, right now is such a moment for people working in DEI. Like, let's dig into how we can use, bottom line, financial sales in these DEI conversations to help people see how it is a business imperative and not all the myths and the blasphemy that's going out in the media and society right now.
It's nuts. That's just there's no really like clean way to put it. It's crazy. The statistics are there that show that when you have a diverse team, you do better. Same thing with sales. Sales is typically the driver for all companies. I wouldn't exist, right? Onboarding, training, enablement wouldn't exist if we didn't need to cultivate sales teams and help them do their job to then grow the company. So if we're talking about bottom line, if you're losing the diversity and then losing the sales component as well, you're losing a big chunk of growth and acceleration to your company. So it has to be a part of the conversation. It has to be a part of the thought process. And on my LinkedIn profile, you'll see it shows the stats of companies that say that they believe that their company isn't growing at the rate at which they want to because of a lack of a sales component, right? And then they say, okay, well, if I do have the sales component, they believe that sales isn't working as effectively because of the training component. So then we talk about the training component, and then we say, then there's a percentage of those folks who say, well, they know training is important, but yet they don't put the dollars towards the training. They then overwork managers and they say, okay, manager, I want you to manage a team and train. And let's just be clear, not every manager is a trainer and not every trainer is a manager. There are two distinct roles. So if you're not investing into the training and development of this team, then you're going to lose. You're going to lose.
How do you weave like DEI into that conversation?
Yeah. So I was working at Yelp when I first started to understand the really complexity and the nuance and really the fun and the joy of coming from a one size fits all training program to including diversity and people's backgrounds and where they come from, regardless of whether that's color, race, gender, all the different components. So I was working at Yelp, and typically we hire about 100 reps a month. Like, it can be as easy as
Wow.
large as that. And come 6 years down, 6 months down the line, a very small percentage, I won't blast them out on there like that, but it was a very high churn back when I was working there, the 2018-ish timeframe. Very, very high turnover. And when you do have those large numbers, there's a certain percentage that you expect to turn over. But I said, okay, hold on. With my team, I would say, okay, let me get to know my people, right? Did this person come from a collegiate background? Did this person not graduate school? So this person's coming out of high school, this person's coming out of college. Where did they grow up? What are their backgrounds? Did they grow up in a family environment? Did they not grow up in a family environment? Did they play sports? Did they not play sports? Like, all of these components. And I would customize my training to that individual, where I would use a soccer reference if you played soccer. I would
Mm.
use a Caribbean reference if you were Caribbean. I would use, maybe if I didn't understand, I would ask questions and say, okay, I'm not really sure much about that. How does that show up for you when you show up to work? How does that show up to you when you're having a conversation with a prospect? And once I understood their mindset, this whole psychology of selling, then they felt seen in the environment. They felt like, wow, this person is talking to me from a lens to which I can understand. And they were more engaged in the conversation. When you have this one size fits all blanket, like, not everybody's going to relate to that. And if they don't relate to it, they become disengaged. If they become disengaged, they become distracted. So they're not paying attention to what's being shown in the training. They're not retaining that information. And then you can apply something that you don't retain, or you can apply something that you're not paying attention to. And when I realized that all of these nuances in your diversity and diverse perspectives and backgrounds could become so heavily, especially in your first 2 weeks, I said, oh man, we got to rinse and repeat that for every class that comes in. Instead of rushing towards your value proposition and objection handling, and this is how you have a conversation, let's stop and let's talk about who you are, where you come from, if you're creating a safe space for us to share those things. And then how does that show up for you when you come into work? How does that, we all hear through filters, right? Like,
Mhm.
everyone hears through the filters of their reality. If I grew up from a single parent household, if I grew up from a family household, if I grew up, all of these things challenge how we receive information. And I can be talking to you, Doc, and you're only hearing certain things because of the lens and the filter that you come from. But if I don't
Mhm.
understand those filters, it's just noise. And that's where communication comes. And it comes from the trainer working with their rep to dismantle that noise, so that when they get on the phones and they can make a sale, they're also realizing and understanding and trying to hear those noise and dismantle it as well, to have effective communication when they sell. So, long-winded answer, but something I'm really passionate about, because it's not that the care isn't taken to understand who we're talking to. And that shows up even in real world, outside of training and work. That shows up in how we connect on LinkedIn, and how we show up in networking spaces. So,
Something I love that you said, and I think it was woven into your whole response, was the importance of individuality and recognizing someone's individuality, going out of your way to pull those examples, to make those connections. And something, I think that's just a huge part of what DEI is. And what got lost in the conversation, in the societal conversation about DEI, is that it only benefits certain populations.
yeah,
But your example makes it loud and clear that DEI done right is individuality for everyone.
absolutely.
Everyone like has to come to work, and I think you called it filter, right? Did you say
Yeah,
filter?
yeah, here.
Filters. So in research they call it covering, right? And we
Mm,
all cover, including straight white men. cover things about who they are, right? In Pittsburgh, if you don't love the Steelers, you would have to cover that coming into work, because that is against the status quo here in Pittsburgh with the Steelers culture. And like, but you shouldn't have to cover, hide, filter who you are. And by not wasting that energy on covering, you can then put that energy into being a better employee, a better leader, a better salesperson. And so,
absolutely.
yeah. So I'm curious, when it comes to bottom line DEI, what are some examples where you've had to make it clear to someone who doesn't quite understand how DEI impacts that bottom line?
So more so on the entrepreneurial side when I started KPA, and it's DEI, but it's also clarity in prioritizing what your goal is and being honest with what your goals are. So answering your question, but also adding another layer of color there as well, which is the root cause of any objection that I have when it comes to training enablement is the financial component. Where do I want to invest my money now versus long term, right? So they say, Kaivona, I need to grow a sales team. I need to get my sales up, right? And I say, okay, you just said two different things, but they sound the same. I need to grow a sales team. I need to get my sales up. Those are very different, right? One is the end result, which I need to improve my sales, but how you get there is two different ways. You can grow a sales team, or you can invest in training on a team that you currently have. Two different conversations. So when we talk about the DEI component and how that plays a role, they have to value the same. They have to prioritize that value, which says, I am saying that training is important, and I'm saying that training, unique, individualized, custom training is important to the team that I'm trying to build, which then results in the increase in sales. Otherwise, you can hire a third party in another country who, you know what I mean, doesn't speak the language, and like pay them pennies on the dollar to cold call at a call center and improve your sales. So when we talk about the long lasting impact of, hey, when we create this program, including DEI, including customized components for your reps, this person will stay. This person will not only stay, but they will also feel so invested that when you do grow, they will become the trainer. Where you paid me once, and you paid me to incorporate DEI training customizations into this program. When I leave, that person is going to take that, and you're going to get your money back 3 or 4 times over, because you have actually put up an initial investment that then spans across the lifetime of their time there. And even if that person leaves, they've already imparted themselves in somebody else, and so forth and so on. So it's less about DEI is important, but it's the long-term investment in the value of the company that you're trying to build. Do you want a quick win? Fine, go do something else. But are you building something that you want to last? And you cannot do that without considering how diversity and inclusion shows up.
So you mentioned training, which is a great example, but what are some other ways that DEI can infiltrate the sales enablement process and then result in that bottom line, benefits?
Yeah, even in hiring, we're looking at how we hire. We're looking at, one of the most difficult parts, but also I get a little bit of joy in it too, is when I go into their hiring systems and I pull out the unqualified the DQ, disqualified sections, and I say, okay, well, let's look at these names. Let's look at these people. Like, why are they disqualified? And I typically throw them back into the pile. I don't announce it. And I would say 7 out of 10 times they become the person that gets into the final round. And those are the unconscious biases. Those are the where we just dismissed the biases that we have when we hire. And then we missed out on great candidates, which improve the bottom line, because now we're having quality hires as opposed to a hire based off of whatever criteria you initially had, which then drives the bottom line as well. So putting training aside, we're talking about who we're bringing in, how we're bringing them in, how we're seeing them or not seeing them as well.
Yeah. And then what about retention? Like, what are some retention strategies? And I think about a client I have, and they just have ridiculously high turnover for their ethnic minority population. And so, like, what could they be doing to help reduce those crazy turnover numbers that they're seeing?
I actually had a conversation around Martin Luther King Jr. Day around this same thing. And it is um, the humanity, we label it as DEI, but it's also just humanity. It's
Yeah.
also just a human response. And um, the company that I'm working with does not have a DEI team. They do not have a formal HR team. And I said, I'm really disappointed with the lack of response or acknowledgement of what today is, even if we Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but also it's inauguration. Like there's a lot of things happening today, and no one's acknowledging that like this is a tough day for people.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't really have a team. Yeah, but you have humans here. You're a human. And I'm sure that you have it playing in the background, it's distracting you from your work today, right? So when we're talking about just conversations that we can have that allow people to be seen in their work environment, to say that wow, they acknowledge that, or wow, they do see that, or wow, they do know that this is what's happening in the world and how it might show up as I work today. Hey, my responses might be a little bit slower today because this is a big day. It's a big distraction. My community is reaching out to me. That retention piece, when people feel like who they are is, they don't have to separate it when they show up to work. And there's a component of that, right? We can't show up as our full selves every single day, but I can't take off my black skin.
Yeah.
I can't take that off, right? I cannot take off the fact that I'm a single mother. I will be a single mother. I can't take that off. So there are certain things that I'm going to naturally show up to work and carry whether I want to or not. And those things that we can't take off, do I have to try to hide that? Do I have to try to, like, you know what I mean? Put that aside
Mhm.
for 8 hours and I will leave. I'm not going to stay someplace where I feel like I have to fight the identity that I didn't have a choice to bring in.
Yeah. So, what are some things that organizations can do? I know you mentioned having a DEI department, maybe employee resource groups. What can be done to help people feel like they can be themselves in the workplace?
For me, I always say, let's not try to change the world, but let's try to improve our sphere of influence. So
Mm,
we don't have to do any like major shifts. So I'm going to invest $3 million on this big project or whatever. It's like, how am I impacting my sphere of influence that then impacts another sphere of influence and impact another sphere of influence? What am I talking about in my one-on-ones? What am I talking about in my individual team meetings? Does my team member feel safe to address something with me? Does my team member feel safe to say, hey, can I put 30, I'm putting 30 minutes on the calendar. I need to take a walk because this just happened. What environment am I creating in my sphere that then translates into others and others? And then all of a sudden, before you know it, those one-on-one conversations become a whole community within the company because you made a certain group of people or a certain number of people feel safe. For example, I had an experience with a colleague at a different company who mentioned, I think there was a joke about Chick-fil-A in a Slack channel. And the person identified as transgender. And I guess because of certain rhetoric around Chick-fil-A, they felt targeted because Chick-fil-A doesn't support the values that they support
mhm,
as being transgender. And they reached out to the manager and said, hi, can we kind of mute the conversation on Chick-fil-A or like switch the conversation to Chick-fil-A? And it was totally dismissed. There was
mm,
no question or inquiry that person was open to expressing the information to like inform them, but there wasn't even an opportunity for information sharing or understanding. It was just like a, we're just talking about chicken sandwich. It ain't that deep. Like
yeah.
they didn't mean it that way. So, it's okay. As opposed to saying, oh, tell me more about that. I genuinely didn't know what that did for you. Can you tell me more? So I am of the belief that we are looking for major solves when it really just comes into play of like my sphere of influence and how I can impact those 3 or 4 people. And then that just spreads like an each one teach one.
I love that. So to get to that retention piece, really focusing on one sphere of influence. And I feel like that's really empowering for those tuning in too, because DEI feels like this huge problem right now that we need to solve or get rid of in some cases, right? And so, what can we do to bring more humanistic approaches to the workplace? You shared how DEI influences sales enablement in terms of hiring, in terms of training. Any just closing thoughts about the bottom line of DEI that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I mean, the bottom line is that diverse teams that close more deals. We connect with broader audiences. And if you are a person or a company that affects or impacts globally, then you would want your company to reflect your customers. You want them to speak the language of your customers. So you would want to hire the folks that can relate to your customers. And if these team members feel supported, feel coached, feel included, feel safe, whether that be through culture, through mentorship, through ongoing development, your retention will increase. You'll have stronger pipeline performance, and ultimately, the bottom line results of growth for your business. So,
if that's not a business case for DEI, I don't know what. Kaivona, how do people get in touch with you if they want to work with you and reach out?
Yes, Kaivona at kpagency.com, but Kaivona Parker is my handle everywhere on LinkedIn and on Instagram as well. Whether you're sending me a DM, a request there, or again, it's Kaivona at kpagencyinc.com. You can send me an inquiry.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise and your passion with us. And thanks for all you do that help us be better humans at work.